something a bit different today, I thought I'd look into the history of Christmas. Because that's social history, isn't it? The thing is about Christmas is there's a lot of history relating to it. I mean, even if you only go back to, say, Henry VIII time, that's still 5 centuries. So what to get through? Logic told me, narrow this down a bit. You're going to be here forever. I was going to look at Christmas as it was about 200 years ago, so 1820, and then I had a better idea. I remembered, of course, that Jane Austen died in 1817. Jane Austen is one of my favourite writers. I go back to her again and again and again. And she was actually born, of all times of the year, in the middle of December, on the 16th of December, 1775. So she was born just in time for the Christmas festivities. We often make this automatic link between Charles Dickens and Christmas. It really isn't that difficult, is it? He wrote A Christmas Carol after all. So for a lot of us, the mental images created as Scrooge encounters the 3 ghosts of Christmas past, present and future are our impression of Dickensian Christmas. But Charles Dickens published A Christmas Carol in 1843, which is a whole 30 years after Jane Austen published Pride and Prejudice. At this point in time, actually, Dickens was a baby. So, out of idle curiosity, I started to wonder, could I find anything out about how Christmas was celebrated in the Regency period? Now, Jane Austen did indeed write 5 novels, I think, that were published during her lifetime, and a couple more that were published afterwards. But she didn't just write novels. Now, Jane Austen wrote a lot of letters, and I do mean a lot. Mainly to her sister Cassandra, also to other relatives, but generally the 2 sisters seem to have exchanged letters whenever they were apart. And frequently it seems that she actually wrote several letters over the course of a few days. So one letter might start on a Tuesday and end on a Thursday or a Friday. She'd write them in segments, like a diary. In 1796 she did exactly that. She begins a letter on Christmas Eve, she writes another bit on Christmas Day, and finally she finishes it on the 26th, when she expected the 3 Digweeds and James, who could possibly be her elder brother James Austen, to come to dinner 2 days later. So we know a little bit about Christmas from Jane's perspective there. Her correspondence doesn't actually cover every single Christmas in her adult life, so we don't know exactly what she did every year. But some 12 years later, on the 27th of December 1808, she begins another letter by saying that our house was cleared by 11:30 on Saturday. Saturday being Christmas Eve, so they must have had visitors. She also notes that a ball at Manydown was being planned. Manydown is where Harris Bigwither lived, I think, who proposed to her. She said yes and changed her mind shortly afterwards. That ball was likely to take place before what she called 12th day, 12th night, I think, 6th of January. And in fact, many of these typical celebrations spill over into her novels. It is implied in Emma that Emma Woodhouse and her father are used to hosting her married sister Isabella, brother-in-law John Knightley, and their 5 children quite often when they arrive for Christmas at an early point in the novel. But even with family visiting, they are still all invited to go out to dinner with Mr. Weston, who has married Emma's former governess, on Christmas Eve. So parties are galore here. However, there are mixed feelings from the attending guests. The fact that it was a very great event that Mr. Woodhouse should dine out on the 24th of December shows just how much Emma's father dislikes the idea of leaving his cosy home on such cold weather. John Knightley, her brother-in-law, complains at Mr. Weston's cheek in asking people to leave their own fireside and encounter such a day as this for the sake of coming to see him. Here we are setting forward to spend 5 dull hours in another man's house with nothing to say or hear that was not said yesterday and may not be said and heard again tomorrow. He really doesn't want to go, does he? 4 horses and 4 servants taken out, but for nothing but to convey 5 idle, shivering creatures into colder rooms and worse company than they might have had at home. The fact that it is actually snowing at this moment really doesn't make him feel any better. On the other hand, another guest, the local vicar, Mr. Elton, has a more optimistic view. Christmas weather, observed Mr. Elton, quite seasonable and extremely fortunate we may think ourselves that it did not begin yesterday and prevent this day's party. At Christmas everybody invites their friends about them, and people think little of even the worst weather. John Knightley would beg to differ. I was snowed up at a friend's house once for a week. What he doesn't tell us, of course, is how his friend actually felt about having to host him for this extra week instead of a single night. Meanwhile, in Sense and Sensibility, Charlotte Palmer has only known Eleanor and Marianne Dashwood for a matter of days when she decides she's going to invite them to stay at Christmas. Some enterprising people, and I will link to this below, have actually taken the time to sit down and work out that Mr. and Mrs. Palmer arrive in the Dashwoods neighbourhood on the 23rd of November or thereabouts, and that a few chapters later we actually find out in the second half of February Mrs. Palmer gives birth to a baby boy, her first baby. So there's no further hint that the Dashwoods actually take up this kind offer of Charlotte's to have them over for Christmas, but it just shows you actually ultimately, although she seems annoying, she is a genuinely nice woman. Clearly Mrs. Palmer must be a nice woman to want to welcome guests at Christmas, whether she's 7 months pregnant or not. She doesn't care, she wants a house full. So now let's look at Pride and Prejudice. The novel itself unfolds over the course of just over a year. It starts autumnish and ends, just over a year later, somewhere between Michaelmas and Christmas. And like Emma Woodhouse in the first Christmas, the Bennet family also celebrate with a visit from relatives. In this case, it's Elizabeth's uncle, Edward Gardiner, and his wife. Now, they only actually stay for a week or so at the Bennets. Even in this short space of time, they go out to see friends or have guests to dinner every single day. By the end of the book, when Elizabeth writes to Mrs. Gardiner to say that she's engaged to Darcy, she ends her letter with the invitation, "You are all to come to Pemberley at Christmas," implying, I think, not only her aunt and uncle, but also their 4 small children. Even though at this point she actually isn't married to Darcy, so I assume that she'd pass that one with him first. So in the middle to upper class world of Jane Austen's novels, Christmas is very clearly associated with family gatherings and celebration of all kinds. And her own letters definitely show that this sort of thing happened in real life too. So I started to wonder, could I find any other historical sources that gave us a clue about how our ancestors might have celebrated Christmas in real life in this particular period in history? I happened to come across an old book from 1893, I think it was, called Gleanings from the Annals of Austen, which is a sort of gathering of little historical snippets relating to Austen near Ormskirk in Lancashire. And it says that 10 shillings was given to the singers at Christmas in 1787. So at this point in time, Jane Austen was basically 12 years old, so that's contemporary with her early life. It doesn't actually tell us what they sang, but maybe we can imagine that it was Christmas carols. Christmas carols seem to have existed at this point in time, and we might well have recognised some of them. If you're into early Christmas carols, you want an idea of what our ancestors might have sung at Christmas, I highly recommend looking at the Bodleian Library's Ballads Online facility. That is well worth a look. There are all sorts of Christmas carols that you can search for, some familiar, some not so familiar. And there I actually found song sheets for the 12 Days of Christmas, dated somewhere between 1774 and 1825, so that was very contemporary with Jane Austen's life. A carol I hadn't heard of, Hark All Round the Welkin Ring. I'd never heard this one sung in my lifetime, obviously something that's gone out of fashion but was popular or at least familiar at some point. Sing ye reformed nations, sing and let peace her olive wand extend. One that would be very familiar to people today and one less so. God rest ye merry gentlemen, and in friendly love and unity, from the same period of time, which actually makes me appreciate the 1995 Pride and Prejudice adaptation that the BBC did even more, because there is something that appears to be taking place around Christmas in which Mariah Lucas is very, very quietly singing God Rest You Merry Gentlemen to accompany Mary Bennet on the piano. Some songs actually weren't all that reverent. Some were a bit gossipy, some were bordering on the interesting. Now bear in mind this is the Regency period where behaviour could be a little more relaxed, I think. You've only got to think of the Prince Regent. You may or may not have come across the very honest song 'Twas on Christmas Day, which apparently dates from 1794 or thereabout. I'll put a link to that in the description box. It's told from the point of view of somebody whose parents married on Christmas Day, only for their firstborn to arrive 3 months later. The mother in question in the story tries to pass off the lover that father catches her in bed with as the milkmaid. Unfortunately, the father is not convinced about this. He's deeply suspicious because the milkmaid has apparently got a very bushy beard. It's not exactly reverent or holy or behaving in any kind of way that we think our ancestors might have behaved at Christmas. That's the Regency period for you, if it's any excuse at all. The author Samuel James Arnold was just a young man of 20 when he wrote it, so maybe that can be his excuse. I hope Jane Austen herself did not know the words to that song. Her father was a clergyman. I think the Reverend George Austen would have wanted her to have a more wholesome knowledge of more traditional Christmas carols and other songs. So in the next part of this series I'm going to continue the musical theme by looking at Christmas entertainment in the Regency period, because of course they didn't have television, they didn't have music or iPods or the internet, they didn't have YouTube to entertain them. They had to make or find or go out to different kinds of entertainment. So that is what I will be looking into next, how our ancestors had fun at Christmas.